Right now in Elbaf, it looks like Imu has parasitized Gunko's body and is slowly bringing the Elbaf warriors under their control. But the truth about them is still a complete mystery. We haven't seen anything beyond their silhouette since their very first appearance. The only real clue we've got is this scene right here. If it was Imu who drew that X mark, then their fingers... well, it looks pretty human. So who exactly is Nerona Imu? As of now, we've seen them destroy the Lulusia kingdom, kill Cobra, and turn Elbaf's warriors into devil-like monsters. It's chaos. But even so, I can't help but feel that Imu might have once been a pure-hearted, kind person. Oda-sensei has a pattern. No matter how evil a character may seem, he always gives us a reason. Something in their past that explains how they became that way. Well, okay, some characters are just straight up awful. No excuses. Anyway, take Doflamingo for example. He literally watched his family get burned alive. The people who did it had lost their own children to the celestial dragons, and that's how revenge works. It just keeps spiraling endlessly. So maybe something similar happened to Imu. Maybe they went through something tragic in the past. Something so painful that they had no choice but to rely on devil power. So if we look at it that way, the biggest mystery becomes, where did this devil power even come from? And how did Imu get their hands on it in the first place? Those are the questions I'll be digging into in this video, based entirely on everything we've seen in One Piece so far, from the perspective of a native Japanese speaker. By the way, the name Pole Star recently popped up in the main story, and a lot of people have been comparing it to Oda-sensei's early world maps. But here's the thing, not many realize that the names in the Japanese version are actually different. I'll get into the details of that in the final part of this video. Also, quick thank you. The last video got more than double the likes compared to the one before it. To show my appreciation, in the next video, I'll be collecting SBS questions for volume 113, so start thinking about what you want to ask. The focus will be on questions related to chapters 1145 and onward. That's the range that's most likely to get picked up. I also do this kind of active back and forth on my Patreon. We've got a lot of content there, including weekly breakdowns of the latest One Piece chapters, with translations and insights from a native Japanese perspective, and discussions based on your questions and suggested topics. In One Piece, Imu's name is written in katakana, but if you try to interpret it using kanji, it can be linked to Buddha. Now, when we think about the face of Buddha in the story, what really comes to mind is that huge golden face on the Arc Maxim. But that's not all. Right next to it, there's a kanji character that means God, and if you break that character down, it can be read as Nerona. So basically, the Maxim contains both Buddha and God imagery, or Imu and Nerona imagery. It's like a luxurious object packed with the symbolism of both. And when you think about the pronunciation of Maxim, it sounds a lot like Max Imu, which once again brings us back to Imu, so there may really be a connection there. But there's one more layer to this. If you reverse the katakana Imu, you get Mui, and when you write that in kanji, it becomes Mui, a Buddhist term that means something like detached from the law of cause and effect, or a state of unchanging, absolute stillness. In Buddhist teaching, it's said that once a person reaches full enlightenment, like the Buddha, they attain this Mui state. And the idea of cause and effect, or Inga in Buddhism, is a huge deal. It's the belief that everything we do determines our future, and even that misfortune in this life may be the result of bad karma from a past one. So if Imu represents Mui, existing outside that cycle of cause and effect, then maybe they're this completely detached, empty being. They hold absolute power, but they're disconnected from karma, from fate, from consequence. And that's probably why Imu is so different from figures like Joy Boy or Roger. Unlike them, Imu can't pass down a will or dream to the next generation. Instead, they just continue to rule the world as this cold, eternal figure at the top. By the way, have you ever noticed the face on the Arc Maxime that looks kind of like a Buddha? Doesn't it remind you of someone? Personally, the first person that comes to mind is Vice Admiral Strawberry from the Marines. His most distinctive feature is that ridiculously long head of his. And funny enough, it actually lines up with the silhouette of Imu. Ever since Imu first appeared in chapter 906, we've only seen them in shadow. But one thing that really stands out is that tall, crown-like shape on their head. Now, here's a thought. What if that's not a crown at all? What if Imu just has a really long head? In one particular scene, that crown-looking thing doesn't even fall off. It just stays attached to their head. That kind of suggests it might not be a crown, but part of their actual body. Then again, physics in manga worlds don't always follow the rules of our world, so we can't say for sure. Now here's a fun bit of trivia. Do you know why Strawberry's head is so long? It's because of sadness. Oda-sensei mentioned this in the SBS section of Volume 97. He said, Strawberry's head grows longer with every sadness he experiences. So what if the same thing happened to Imu? What if, during the Void Century, Imu went through one tragic event after another, and all that grief just kept stretching their head longer and longer until it became the shape we see today? Like I mentioned at the beginning, I actually believe the original Norona Imu was a kind, gentle person. They even referred to themselves as Mu, which sounds kind of sweet and innocent, right? But as you know, overwhelming despair and sorrow can completely change a person. And Imu was no exception. After going through one tragedy after another, they couldn't take it anymore. The weight of all that sorrow built up over time. Eventually, they gave in and turned to a devil for help. I think that's when Imu made a pact with a devil. By doing so, they became detached from the cycle of cause and effect that rules the world. They lost their emotions and basically became an empty shell. I also believe they used a grimoire, a magical book, to summon that devil. And once the contract was sealed, the devil parasitized Imu's body, fusing with them and shaping the personality we see now. We've seen a similar thing happen before, like with Dory and Brogy. After making their own devil contracts, their hearts were consumed by evil. And here's where it gets even more interesting. I think that very same grimoire Imu used might actually be the national treasure of Mariejois that Doflamingo talked about. There's a line from Doflamingo that really stands out. He says, "If I'd gotten my hands on the Ope Openomi that day, I could have used the national treasure of Mariejois to take control of the entire world." For the longest time, we didn't know why the Ope Openomi was connected to the national treasure. But if we consider that the treasure might be the very book Imu used to form a devil contract, it all starts to make sense. So, here's how a devil contract works. You give up a certain amount of your lifespan, and in return, you're granted an undying body and unreal physical strength. But just from that description, you can tell, having an undying body doesn't mean you live forever. Which brings us to the Gods' Knights. They may have undying bodies, but they're still aging. That seems to be the case. But the real mystery is with the 5 elders and the Gunko. Take Saturn, for example. He supposedly looked the same for over 200 years. And as for the Gunko, it seems he knew Brook before he even became a pirate, which means he's been around for at least 60 years, probably more. So what does that tell us? It points to the possibility that Imu has the ability to manipulate lifespan. In fact, in the most recent chapter, it looks like Imu extracted a portion of Dory and Brogy's lifespan. That suggests they might also be able to give that stolen time to someone else. If that's true, then maybe the Five Elders and the Gunko are staying alive by feeding on the lifespan of others, either the gods' knights who made devil contracts, or maybe even other celestial dragons, or ordinary people brought to Mariejois as offerings. That might be how they maintain their undying bodies, not by being truly immortal, but by consuming the lifespans of others to keep themselves going. Now here's where things get even darker. Imu themselves appears to have taken on the form of a devil. And what's more, it looks like Imu can freely grant that devil power to others, or even summon weapons at will. If that's the case, they're probably offering up lifespan in exchange for each of those powers. So the big question is, how is Imu still alive? This is where the eternal youth granted by the Ope Ope no Mi comes into play. Thanks to that ability, Imu likely gained an endless lifespan. That would mean they can keep making deals with the devil, giving away lifespan without ever dying. They have unlimited time to trade. Which might explain Doflamingo's obsession. Maybe he wanted to get his hands on the Ope Ope no Mi and have someone use it on him to make him ageless. That way, he could reach the same level of power and longevity as Imu. But there's more. It's also said that once someone falls under Imu's control through this technique, they're no longer bound by common sense or rational thought. We saw this happen. Dory tried to kill Yarul, someone he should have cared deeply about. That wasn't normal, and this brings us back to Sugar's ability. Remember how Sugar could turn people into toys? Once they made a contract with her, they lost their free will and had to follow her commands. They couldn't disobey her. What if that whole idea, the puppet strings, the contracts, the hidden power, it all came from what he saw Imu do? That would explain everything. The inspiration behind Doflamingo's power plays and why he was so fixated on becoming someone like Imu-chan. Now this raises a big question. Where did this devil power that Imu and the sorcerers use actually come from in the first place? Personally, I think the biggest clue lies in something we've seen in the grimoire itself. Something called the Abyss. A lot of the strange magic Imu uses seems to come through this abyss. In chapter 1150, we saw Imu summon a kind of translucent magic circle, allowing them to freely pull out weapons or even transform giants into devil-like beings. And what's more, people who seem to share Imu's power, like the Five Elders and the God's Knights, can apparently travel huge distances by passing through the abyss. Here's something else worth noting. Every character we've seen with an undying body has made their entrance through the abyss. That's probably not a coincidence. And every time the abyss appears, it's marked by a symbol, a pentagram. That suggests devil power is deeply connected to the stars, or even outer space itself. And out of all the celestial bodies, the one we really need to focus on is the moon. Take a look at the ancient murals that Enel discovered in that city on the moon. If you look closely, you'll see strange characters, just like the ones shown in the abyss. It's the same kind of mysterious writing. And check this out. The title of that mural Enel found was People of the Moon Who Lived in Ancient Times. Now, here's the interesting part. The word taiko in this case isn't the same as what we usually call ancient in the One Piece world. This taiko refers to a time even older than the so-called ancient era, the one connected to things like Emeth or the ancient energy that likely existed during the Void Century. In other words, the civilization of the Moon People must have reached its peak way before the Void Century even began. And according to what we know, these moon people eventually came down to the blue planet because they ran out of resources. That alone tells us that this advanced knowledge, the power of devils, technology, and cosmic science, was likely introduced to the planet by them long before the events of the Void Century. We even hear the phrase moon people mentioned in Harley's explanation of the Second World, which strongly suggests there was deep interaction between them and the blue planet's inhabitants. So then, what about the current world of One Piece? People today can use devil powers by eating devil fruits, but the true source of that power, the ability to manipulate it freely, seems to be limited to just a few: Imu, the Five Elders, and the God's Knights. As for science and technology, even Vegapunk admits that modern knowledge still doesn't measure up to what existed 900 years ago. And look at the scholars we've seen so far in One Piece. There are archaeologists, botanists, physicists, meteorologists, but curiously, we've never seen an astronomer. No one seems to be researching the stars or trying to understand how the universe works, except for one pirate. That's why I've always thought this has to be intentional. Imu and the Five Elders are likely controlling information, actively suppressing anything related to space and the truth about the stars. But recently, someone appeared in the story who might be indirectly carrying on that lost knowledge of the universe. And that person is Estrida. The biggest clue here is the philosophy Estrida studied, something called earth-wind technique. Based on how much she cared about the placement of furniture in the royal palace, it's likely this was a form of fusui, which itself is rooted in the ancient Chinese philosophy of the five elements. To put it simply, the philosophy of the five elements is an old natural philosophy that says everything in the universe is made up of five elements: fire, water, wood, metal, and earth. And here's where it gets interesting. When you combine each of these five elements with the kanji character for star, they become the names of actual planets. Those are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the five planets known in ancient times. And together, they're called the five stars Gosei. This is exactly what Estrida was referring to when she mentioned the term five-star kill. If you look at the planetary model in Ohara, it's clear that the One Piece world doesn't have the exact same planets as ours, but they do seem to recognize five key celestial bodies. And they call them the five stars too. That's probably where the title Five-Star Elders Gorosei comes from. It seems likely that, back when the world government was first established, they wanted a title that reflected their supreme authority. So they borrowed a term from ancient cosmic philosophy that people on the blue planet already respected, these five powerful celestial bodies, and used it as a symbol of their dominance. And then there's that line from Garling, when he referred to the five elders as same stars, Dosei. That one phrase shows just how important the idea of stars really is to their identity. Now, here's something extra intriguing. If you connect all five of these elements, fire, water, wood, metal, and earth, you get a shape, a star. In Japan, this five-pointed star is known as the Gobosei, and it was passed down as a powerful protective charm, a ward against evil. And that exact same word, Gobosei, is used in the kanji writing for abyss, the force that keeps showing up in connection with Imu and devil power. And then, there's one more presence, something said to exist at the very center of it all. In Chinese cosmology, at the core of the five elements philosophy, there's a concept called Tai-Itsu or Tai-Kyoku, which translates to the Great Ultimate, or Supreme Ultimate. It represents the origin of the entire universe, the fundamental force behind how the 5 elements interact with each other. It's the source everything springs from, and that's exactly what Imu represents. In this cosmic model, if the 5 elders each symbolize one of the 5 elements, then Imu, who stands above them all, would be the Tai-Itsu, the great ultimate at the foundation of everything. So here's something fascinating. This Tai-Itsu, the great ultimate we talked about earlier, it's actually said to be the embodiment of the North Star. Now think about what the North Star is. Unlike other stars in the sky, which appear to rotate throughout the night, the North Star stays fixed in one spot. It holds the center of the sky. Everything else seems to spin around it. That unshakable, central position symbolizes exactly what Tai-Itsu represents: the ultimate source, the cosmic center, the origin of all order and existence, which means Imu is basically a North Star figure. In fact, in ancient China, the North Star's unmoving nature made it known as the throne of the celestial emperor. And if you look at the design of the empty throne in Mariejois, it actually includes a pattern that looks like a path of stars stretching up to the North Star. And since this place is called the center of the world, it's no stretch to say that the spear behind the empty throne is symbolically pointing from the center of the earth upward toward the North Star, suggesting that Imu sits at the very top, watching over everything from a divine fixed position. When you think about it this way, that scene takes on a whole new depth. In it, Harold is teaching others that the North Star can be used as a guide for navigation, and from that, we realize something important. Before the Great Pirate Era began, most people around the world didn't even know the North Star existed, which means navigation as a whole had barely spread at all. But why? Sure, part of it could be because the world was flooded. Traveling by sea became far more dangerous, and so traditional navigation might have just died out over time. But there's another possibility. What if the world government intentionally hid the existence of the North Star? That kind of absolute authority wasn't allowed to belong to anyone except the celestial dragons. So even if something like the North Star existed naturally, they probably thought it'd be a problem if people started worshiping it. Too much of a hassle. Even though the North Star is just a part of nature, the government might have feared that it could become a spiritual symbol, and that would have been too much of a threat. But Elbaf was different. The giants still had navigation techniques that used the North Star, and that's probably because Elbaf is a country that respects tradition, just like how they continue to hold strong beliefs in Nika even in modern times. Their way of life makes it easier for knowledge to be passed down. Plus, giants live way longer than humans, about 3 times longer. That alone helps preserve their knowledge over centuries without it fading away. Think about it. For regular humans, 3 generations span about 90 years. But for the giants, that's close to 270 years. No wonder they've been able to hold on to ancient knowledge while the rest of the world forgot. By the way, it seems that 70 years ago, Harold visited the seas around Wano country. And if you look closely, the people on his ship had swords at their waists, which pretty much confirms it was a samurai ship. That suggests that the knowledge of navigation Harold passed on eventually led to Kozaburo and Furiko illegally leaving Wano 55 years ago. Now, since Wano is located in the New World, navigation there usually depends on log poses, so at first glance, you'd think knowledge of the North Star wouldn't really be necessary. Even within the Grand Line, if someone were to lose their log pose or get stranded, having knowledge of the North Star and Elbaf-style navigation techniques could save their life. So, in that sense, what Harold passed on wasn't just tradition, it was a crucial survival skill. Roger named the island where Joy Boy left the One Piece raftel But as we later found out, the real pronunciation was actually laugh-tail. Now, when you write laugh-tail in Japanese, it looks completely different from raftel. Oda-sensei probably used raftel on purpose to keep the real name hidden, and there might be a similar trick going on somewhere else. So, in the English version, both the sea around Logetown and what Harold referred to are translated as Pole Star, but in Japanese, they're actually written differently. It's kind of like the difference between laugh-tail and raftel. What Harold hinted at is written as Pole Star, but the sea that includes Logetown is called Polu Star in Japanese. That little change might not be a mistake. It could be intentional. Classic information control.